Well, as soon as we touched down, that occurred. We were on the moon, you know. I am on the moon. Since we were 6 hours late, you pretty much couldn't believe it either. We're here now. John, hello? You might scan the area while sampling to see if you spot any specific bolts. The unexpected was ultimately revealed by Charles Duke, the youngest astronaut to set foot on the moon after 50 years of secret. He did not mention glory, nor did he mention Apollo 16's victory. Instead, he described an unplanned area, a signal that was stopped, or an object that was not on any map, something that had been hidden and that no report had dared to mention for 50 years. Although the fall was extremely stressful and tight, we persisted and reached the last minute before landing, even if our trajectory wasn't ideal. And this is the man who walked in the moon's shadow, making his last admission. I'm experiencing the thrill, the wonder, the excitement, the adventure, and the moon. And it was this glorious desolation, as Buzz Aldrin put it. The first person in history to leave a family portrait on the moon is Charles Duke. Media once characterized it as a heartwarming personal experience that had nothing to do with scientific objectives. There was more to the image than just his wife and 2 sons. Duke claimed that a coded symbol, an internal string of characters exclusive to NASA's Special Purpose Communication System, was printed on the back of it. Other than the test apparatus and the picture, I was not supposed to leave anything behind, but I had to. According to Duke, the fact that a scanned copy of the image with the peculiar ink on the back has been kept at the Houston Center since the 1970s but is not included in any official NASA records serves as more evidence of this information. In a recent private interview, Duke claimed that following a direct discussion with his superiors during pre-mission training, he personally recommended bringing the picture. I'm not sure who agreed or why, but I was told quite plainly that there was only one object, one time, and no questions asked. Following that, Duke recalled, he was in charge of the last staging location at EVA-3 where the equipment was gathered as Apollo 16 got ready to depart the lunar surface. A rock with a unique code that did not correspond to the official rock sample numbering scheme in the report was next to the photo, which was positioned in the south corner close to the lander, around 7 meters from the rover area. Duke claims that the location of the photo was not decided at random. He referred to this as the signal interference point, which is where the most peculiar disruptions were seen during the first geomagnetic measurements. The image was left in place since the Apollo 16 team only moved the receiver to change its position once during the mission. Significantly, the seismic data gathered 40 minutes after the team's departure revealed a number of oddities that were seen but not addressed in any documentation made available to the public. Although the disturbance was not specifically stated by Charles Duke, he made a point of saying, "The photo was not left because I wanted it. It was requested and I just did it." The photo was originally widely reported on American media, but official records have since rarely brought it up. Reprints of the original photograph up until recently revealed faint handwriting thought to be Duke's and eraser marks on the back. Duke stated in an unpublished interview, "Each of us has our own way of keeping quiet. For me, it was a photograph." When asked why he didn't disclose it sooner, Duke simply responded, "The photograph stayed there so I could leave." Charles Duke's silence was a result of both what he saw in the location where he had been and the act of leaving a photograph. As Apollo 16 got closer to the landing zone, and location he acknowledged was different from the first time I viewed it from orbit, the symptoms started to become more obvious, and a number of strange things that could not be explained by conventional facts or coincidence happened there during those hours on the lunar surface. The meeting in the dark of the hills of Descartes. Because of its untamed landscape, which had never been seen before, the Descartes Plateau was selected as the landing site for Apollo 16. Charles Duke mentioned on several occasions that there was something in the vicinity that was causing the instruments to become unsteady. "We saw faint points of light moving slowly, then disappearing behind the rocks," he wrote in an internal crew memo. When the probe picked up an odd signal from north of the plateau upon landing, Duke and John Young were told to move the module a couple hundred meters away from the region, which he says was not in the original plan and was only reported to Mission Control after landing. The two were traveling with the rover on their second lunar walk when the transmitter encountered a 7-minute interference. They called back multiple times, but the audio signal was only static, and all systems seemed to be operating normally. Following the issue, Duke asked to stop and check, but ground orders ordered him to continue. After returning to Earth, that portion of the signal was taken off the public tape, but Duke said the whole control team heard it clearly during the live transmission. He also noted in the flight log that there was a noise, like metal hitting metal, that was not coming from the equipment, and the corresponding recording was confirmed to exist in the technical archive. The portable seismometer began to move strangely at the last rock sampling point hours later, and Duke wrote in his handwritten log, "The oscillations are increasing like something is moving underneath." Since the EVA was coming to an end, he was not permitted to continue testing, and in a recent interview, Duke acknowledged that the incident was the only time he had ever been truly afraid. As he recalled, "We were on the quietest land known to man, but underfoot everything was shaking slightly, and no one wanted to talk about it anymore." He returned to the module and quickly examined the samples, noting that one with the odd code was a darker gray, smoother, and colder than the others, and that it had been removed from the 200-pound rock catalog after the flight. Years later, when asked when contact had been lost, Duke simply responded, "We never lost contact." In another video, Duke said to tersely, "There's something they took, and I know exactly what it is." He did not specify what the object was, but he did say that the data associated with it was classified at a highly classified level. "Everything we do is recorded," he said at the Texas meeting, adding, "Information about the seismic signals and fluctuations recorded coincided with his diary showing an unusual activity lasting about 20 minutes. The data was encoded in the technical records in a special symbol that was deciphered decades later and matched Duke's account." In addition to the technical information, Duke's handwritten notes show a significant shift in his mood. "Seen, heard, understood what they want to hide." The final entries in his Descartes diary read, "However, not everything is kept." This statement has been interpreted by many as proof that some information was left out during the publication process. The threat on Earth and the unbreakable contract made life after his return to Earth different from that of any other Apollo crew member. While other crew members were praised, rested, and told about their experiences, Duke's life changed the moment he stepped out of the capsule. Charles Duke didn't get the same rest as other astronauts after Apollo 16 because, within 48 hours of his return, he was asked to attend a private meeting that lasted over 3 hours and only had 3 other people present, not at the Johnson Space Center but at a facility directly controlled by the Air Force. A verbal note from one of the 3 present was attached to the special document, which was a pledge of complete secrecy stamped with the highest level of security at the time. In the document, Duke was asked to attest that none of the strange things he had seen during the trip would ever be brought up again, not even in front of Congress or in internal hearings. "I signed something that I couldn't take back," he confirmed in a closed-door interview last year. "They didn't ask me to lie, they asked me to keep quiet." Duke was not permitted to keep a copy of the pledge, and the entire document was confiscated on the spot after he signed it. "You have done your duty. Don't let what you saw ruin the rest of your life." Since then, his every action has been closely watched, and whenever he attends a public event, at least one federal censorship agency representative is with him. Non-technical questions are either not broadcast or cut from the recording. Many people thought this was standard practice, but Duke disclosed that there was a distinct difference between him and his peers. Charles Duke never brought up the weird item on the moon in public, but in a private chat, he stated, "I know what they can do." After a fellow astronaut made a joke about it and was banned from speaking for 2 years. "I've had enough experience to know my limits." He had one of his most uncomfortable news conferences. Years later, he explained, "I didn't shy away because I had nothing to say." When someone in the crowd abruptly asked him about the signal loss during Apollo 16, Duke swiftly shifted the topic, and the press conference ended within minutes. "I had no other option." The government weren't the only ones that put pressure on people to be quiet. He never reported these incidents, but Duke kept meticulous notes in his personal notebook. During his post-mission years, he received numerous calls from unidentified people, most of which said the same thing: keep your promise. On one occasion, he was on a business trip and found that personal documents had been opened, but there was no indication of a break-in. In response to a question about why he did not decline to sign the pledge, he stated unequivocally, it was not an option at the time. Since then, Duke has mostly stayed away from discussing anything other than technical subjects. And despite his frequent appearances at scientific conferences, he has always stayed within the bounds of what is allowed. I knew what would happen if I spoke, he says in an unreleased audio. His wife reportedly said that he frequently got up in the middle of the night, said nothing, and simply strolled about the house in silence because he knew what would happen if he didn't, so he decided to let others live in peace. This pressure persisted for decades and affected his entire family. Duke never gave an explanation, but he kept saying, "I saw something I shouldn't have seen, and they don't want me to repeat it." He remained silent for many years, since it was the only way to ensure his safety and the protection of others around him, in addition to fulfilling his pledge. The stories he never told started to be documented from this point on, and it all began with a dream that lingered before the day he left Earth, a dream before the launch, and the shadows that lingered. Charles Duke had a bad case of the flu a week prior to the launch of Apollo 16, and he was kept in the crew quarters to be treated in isolation to make sure he was healthy enough for the mission. During his fever, he had a multi-hour dream that he later described as the scariest thing he had experienced before the flight. And it was not your usual nightmare. Duke claimed to have been standing on a desolate piece of land with the sky as gray as ash and the silhouette of a tilted module in the distance, calling out but getting no response. It took him several minutes to realize that he was in a quarantine area in Houston. When he woke up, he told his wife about the dream without going into detail. He tried to move but felt the ground beneath him vibrate a little, making a metallic sound. In her diary, Di Duke, who had maintained her composure during the training, wrote, "I'm not sure I'll come back." Years later, she confirmed that this was the only time her husband had ever displayed any fear prior to a mission. Following the flight, Duke never spoke about the dream in public, but in private meetings, he claimed that it continued after I woke up. He thought the experience had something to do with what had happened on the journey and what he had seen on the Cartesian plateau. The dream kept coming back after Apollo 16, he claimed, and each time he closed his eyes, he saw the module falling and a dark area spreading behind it. The frequency of the dreams increased to the point where he had problems falling asleep. He once said, "I knew something was watching," referring to the evenings he would stay up until dawn, gazing out the window, waiting for the sun to rise before falling asleep. The moon wasn't the location. I had it inside me. At this point, Duke started to undergo significant change. He quit his job as an engineer to become an activist for social and religious causes. Though he periodically repeated a statement in speeches, he claimed that faith was the source of his redemption. Humans are not able to explain everything. In a private chat, Duke reportedly said very slowly and forcefully, "I saw something that wasn't in the training plan." When asked what he meant, a former colleague said, "Duke simply responded, 'You weren't there, so you wouldn't understand what I mean.'" The dream came back more often after he became 80. Every time, he would awaken in the middle of the night and take a silent stroll around the house. According to his relatives, he would frequently stand in front of old family pictures as though he were comparing them to something he remembered. It was a place he never really left. In a secret recording, Doi Duke once said, Duke claimed that at first, he believed the dream was the product of stress. However, he was increasingly certain that it was a type of memory that he would never be able to get rid of. "I didn't have a lost dream," he added. "I just dreamed that where I was, there was something unfinished." Many of Duke's loved ones were taken aback by his sudden change in conduct and demeanor. He was regarded as a quiet, collected individual who always acted in a military manner. People believed he had overcome his beliefs after he had been talking about it in public for a year. In practice, however, he still carried a feeling of terror, and for that reason he made the decision to make one final statement, no longer to narrate a tale but to express what had never been recognized. Finally, before it's too late, the confession. Charles Duke, who was 90 years old, unscripted and unedited, an almost 20-minute film. Sitting by himself, he spoke in a steady, unhurried voice, as though every syllable had been suppressed for too long while staring directly at the camera. "I have been silent as they asked me to be for 50 years, was the first line of the audio. He affirmed that his crew had discovered an area of odd signals 500 meters from the module during the Apollo 16 flight. He received an oscillating signal of unknown origin that repeated in an 11-second cycle while the equipment was being tested. For almost 17 minutes, the seismograph displayed an abrupt surge in values that did not correspond to any human activity. Duke did not specify the precise position, but he claimed that a cylindrical object around his height, with a body covered in fine dust, inhabited the region. Not reported to the center, not shown on topographic maps. He found the item when John Young was in the command module, so the story goes. He could only watch it for a few minutes because of time constraints. I had never seen a device like the one he described. More significantly, unlike rocks, it did not reflect light. Duke doesn't use any speculative language in the video. He makes it clear that this is neither an emotion nor an error. He says, "I know what I saw. I am aware that it was not brought up by us, and I am aware that I am not permitted to discuss it." He waited for another voice over the following 50 years, but no living person ever brought it up. Everyone has signed the same promise, he thought. Regarding the item, he said that it was in good condition but had a dent in the center, as though it had been mechanically damaged. His radio made a loud, crackling sound that lasted for 4 seconds, just as he was turning to pick up a close specimen. Then there was quiet. No copy of Apollo 16 that was made available to the public contained the signal. Duke asserted, however, that he was aware the original data remained. Simply put, it was never made accessible. When I realized that something greater than ourselves was happening, he referred to the entire event. Finally, he stated unequivocally, "I only need someone to record this. I don't need anyone to believe me." Following the video, Duke declined to respond to any more inquiries. According to his relatives, this was the final time he made any reference to the Apollo 16 mission. His entire life was linked to a program that never fully disclosed the facts. The signal he knew he had transmitted, however, was what he remembered most, not the lunar surface. Everything else started with that signal. The account of Charles Duke is really thought-provoking. He discloses the last words of a historical witness who remained silent for half a century, in addition to the memories of a guy who set foot on the moon. Please support the material by leaving a like if you think the information in this video is worthwhile sharing. To ensure you don't miss any more significant stories, remember to subscribe to the channel and share it with your friends. How do you feel about Charles Duke's remarks? Comment in the space provided below. I'll read everything.